Why is spitting essential if you really want to taste wine seriously? What made Hong Kong's wine boom in 2010 feel both extravagant and generous? And does formal wine tasting language strip the emotion out of wine writing? In today's episode, you'll hear the stories and tips that answer those questions in our chat with Sarah Heller, Master of Wine. By the end of our conversation, you'll also discover how Sarah's wine career almost ended before it began, why her accident in southern France strengthened her commitment to the wine industry, what it was like to represent a restaurant alone at age 20 at the world's largest wine trade fair, the difference between wine marketing and wine education, how Sarah's fine art training at Yale University shaped the way she thinks about wine, what inspired her to move beyond traditional tasting notes and create visual ones instead, how shape, color, mood, and texture form the foundation of her visual tasting method, and how the shape of a wine differs between a plush Australian Shiraz and a structured Barolo, for example. Do you have a thirst to learn about wine? Do you love stories about wonderfully obsessive people, hauntingly beautiful places, and amusingly awkward social situations? Well, that's the blend here on the Unreserved Wine Talk podcast. I'm your host, Natalie McLean, and each week I share with you unfiltered conversations with celebrities in the wine world, as well as confessions from my own tipsy journey as I write my third book on this subject. I'm so glad you're here. Now pass me that bottle, please, and let's get started. Welcome to episode 378. So, what's on your drinks calendar this week? February 25th doubles as National Chocolate-Covered Nut Day and National Clam Chowder Day, which screams coastal comfort plus a crunchy dessert course. Start with chowder paired with a crisp saline Chablis or an unoaked Chardonnay to cut through that creamy, briny richness. Then finish with chocolate-covered almonds, oh yes please, and a ruby port or coffee liqueur cocktail. For the ambitious, make both New England and Manhattan-style chowders and do a side-by-side tasting to see which pairs better with Pinot Grigio versus, say, a light Beaujolais. February 26th is National Chili Day, falling on the last Thursday of February, which means it's time to challenge the myth that beer is the only pairing. A fruit-forward Zinfandel or spicy Syrah can handle the heat beautifully, while a slightly sweet off-dry Gewürztraminer provides a cooling contrast. Set up a chili cook-off where each contestant must suggest a wine pairing for their recipe. It's also National Pistachio Day, a great excuse to do pistachio biscotti with vin santo, scatter them over a cheese board with aged manchego and a nutty amontillado sherry, or go modern with a pistachio cream espresso martini riff. February 27th stacks National Strawberry Day and National Kahlua Day, which is basically permission to serve strawberry-topped tiramisu and call it research. Macerate strawberries in balsamic vinegar and black pepper, then serve over vanilla ice cream with a glass of sparkling rosé. For Kahlua Day, master a Black Russian or make a proper espresso martini. Did you know this Mexican liqueur actually takes 7 years to produce from the time the coffee beans are planted? Celebrate by making a Kahlua poke cake, poking holes in the chocolate cake and drenching it in the liqueur, or try it as a baby Guinness shot. February 28th is a big event. Open That Bottle Night, celebrated on the last Saturday of February, when you're encouraged to finally drink that special bottle you've been saving for the perfect occasion. The whole point is that tonight is the perfect occasion simply because you're alive and you have friends or family to share it with. Invite people over with the rule that everyone must bring a bottle they've been hoarding and explain why they've been saving it. Then open everything and taste through the collection while sharing stories. The couple that started the Open That Bottle Night movement are former Wall Street journalist, wine columnists Dorothy Gator and John Brecher, also husband and wife in real life, and I interviewed them on this podcast, so go back and take a listen to that episode. You can also read their book called Love by the Glass, which is beautiful. It's a moving memoir that explores how a shared passion for wine fueled their decades-long journalism careers and led to the creation of the OTBN movement. March 1st brings National Fruit Compote Day, essentially permission to poach any fruit you have lying around in red wine with cinnamon, star anise, and orange zest, and serve it warm over a pound cake or Greek yogurt. Use an inexpensive but fruity Côte de Rhône for cooking, then drink a nicer bottle of the same style alongside the dessert. It's also National Peanut Butter Lovers Day, which pairs surprisingly well with aged tawny port. March 2nd is National Crepe Day, so channel your inner Parisian and make both savory buckwheat galettes and sweet dessert crepes. Fill the savory crepes with ham, gruyere, and a fried egg, then pair them with a steely muscadet or a bone-dry champagne. For dessert crepes, flambe with Grand Marnier or spread with Nutella and bananas, pairing with a demi-sec sparkling wine. It's also National Banana Cream Pie Day, which screams out for a late harvest Riesling. March 3rd is a triple threat: International Irish Whiskey Day, National Moscow Mule Day, and International Mulled Wine Day. For Irish Whiskey Day, set up a tasting flight comparing smooth Jameson, spicy Redbreast, or peaty Connemara, or make a proper Irish coffee. The trivia nugget is that this date celebrates Ireland's love of three, including triple distillation and the minimum 3-year maturation rule. For Moscow Mule Day, remember the 3-3 rule: 3 ingredients, vodka, ginger beer, and lime. 3 creators, celebrated on the 3rd day of the 3rd month. Break out the copper mugs and experiment beyond the classic formula with mezcal mules or bourbon mules. Mulled Wine Day is perfect for those late winter evenings when you want to fill your house with the aroma of cinnamon, cloves, orange peel, and a warming red wine. So what's new in the drinks world? Well, Jamie Chicken, chair of the Ontario Craft Wineries, reports the Buy Canadian movement has sparked serious investment. An estimated $40 to $50 million in capital has flowed into Ontario's wine industry in 2025, and he expects that to double this year as wineries expand vineyard plantings and meet surging demand. The Ontario government says it has a new agreement with Diageo that includes investment in Ontario-made, ready-to-drink beverages, with Crown Royal staying on LCBO shelves. Ontario Premier Doug Ford had ordered the whiskey off all provincial store shelves this month after Diageo announced plans to build a bottling plant in Alabama. The irony? Crown Royal will still be entirely made in Canada at its Manitoba distillery and bottled in Quebec. Ford essentially mandated that Ontario boycott a Canadian product. A new study found that 66% of wine consumers choose sustainably produced wines specifically to support small farmers, nearly twice as many as those prioritizing environmental benefits. The consumer motivations around sustainability are shifting from abstract environmentalism to tangible human connection. And isn't that what it's all about? Storytelling, the person behind the bottle. Speaking of bottles, the marketing world is currently obsessed with lightweight luxury. This week, the Sustainable Wine Roundtable announced its bottle weight accord is on track to strip nearly 300 grams off the average 750 ml bottle by the end of the year. That's about half its weight. It's very significant, proving that heavy glass is no longer the shorthand signal for high quality. Some premium wines use bottles weighing up to 1,100 grams to try to signal quality to consumers. That's almost twice the weight of current bottles. Lightweight eco bottles, until recently, were typically around 420 to 450 grams. This is a significant movement and one of the most impactful changes that can be made in the wine industry's environmental footprint. A new glow-in-the-dark label has been developed by European researchers that changes color if the wine inside has been exposed to spoilage-level temperatures, turning your bottle into a literal distress signal for your palate. Israeli scientists at Hebrew University have created a biosensor made from glowing bacteria that literally lights up when the wine starts to spoil. The engineered bacteria emit light when they detect acetic acid, the compound that gives spoiled wine its vinegar smell and sour taste. The sensor works in the head space above the wine without opening the bottle or tank, detecting volatile acetic acid in the air. In lab tests, the biosensor showed a strong response to acetic acid at spoilage-relevant concentrations. The light signal increased 5 to 8 times. The system uses a natural bacterial regulator which activates the light-producing gene when acetic acid is present. Researchers say it could revolutionize wine quality control by providing real-time warnings before entire batches are ruined, and it costs just a few dollars per test compared to tens of thousands of dollars for traditional gas chromatography equipment. Speaking of color, when you tilt a wine glass against a white background, you're reading the wine's age. Red wines develop what sommeliers call bricking at the rim as they mature, as the phenolic compounds that give wine its color polymerize and drop out of suspension over time. A young wine shows a tight ruby edge. An older wine reveals a brick orange or amber gradient creeping from the rim toward the center. White wines do the opposite. They start pale and get darker, moving from straw to gold to amber. So the next time you open a bottle, tilt the glass and let color tell part of its story. Wine lovers looking to improve their drinking experience might want to follow one simple rule: drink more water. Health experts recommend 1 full glass of water for every glass of wine to help your body process naturally occurring compounds like histamines and quercetin in grape skins. Sounds like an alien from a distant planet, but it just might save you from that morning headache. Of course, wine in moderation will take care of most of those kinds of situations, and I fully advocate for it. The premium Jell-O shot trend has officially hit high-end hotel bars where shots are now being served on silver platters as clarified botanical-infused cubes for $15 each. The wildest weird trend? Some bars are treating them like tiny plated desserts with grown-up flavor layering, which feels equal parts hilarious and inevitable. This week I made my first appearance on CTV's The Good Stuff with Mary Berg. This national show is hosted by Mary Berg, who won MasterChef Canada back in 2016, the first ever female to win that franchise. She has since hosted Mary's Kitchen Crush on CTV and Mary Makes It Easy on the Food Network, winning multiple Canadian Screen Awards. She is also the author of numerous award-winning cookbooks. In 2023, Mary took over the CTV daytime prime spot of The Marilyn Dennis Show, which had been running for 13 seasons. I was both excited and nervous to be on the show, but it went so well that the producers have asked me to come back. Yay! So let's get into that episode because I can share the tips with you. So wine, of course, can sometimes feel intimidating, like you need a degree or a fancy vocabulary to enjoy it. But the truth is, hosting your own informal wine tasting at home is one of the most fun, relaxed ways to spend an evening with friends. And you only need 3 bottles to do it. Who better to help us organize a tasting than Natalie McLean, editor of Canada's largest wine review site. Great to be here with you, Mary. You know, I always say a wine tasting is a book club for people who didn't read the book. You get all the great conversation and laughs, but the only homework is drinking wine. So why the 3-bottle formula? 3 is the magic number because it gives you enough variety to compare and contrast without overwhelming your guests or your palate. The secret is to choose a white, a rosé, and a red. This takes you on a taste journey from light and refreshing to rich and robust. It also mirrors how we typically drink at a dinner party: white with appetizers, rosé with a starter, red with heartier fare. So, the basics of wine tasting. The 5 S's make tasting easy peasy. Let's do it together with our white wine, this crisp, refreshing Sauvignon Blanc from Oyster Bay. Step number 1. C. Now, you often notice people holding up their wine glasses to the light in a restaurant. Looks very sophisticated. Yeah, don't do that. It only tells you how many colors the wine can reflect from the restaurant's wallpaper. Instead, hold your glass against something white like a napkin and look at the color. The deeper the color for white wines, the more full-bodied, oaky, or older the wine is. There's no oak on this wine, and its lighter color suggests it's young and zesty, which already gives us a clue before we taste it. Step 2, swirl. This releases the wine's aromas. The training wheels version is to do it on the table until you're confident enough to do it in the air without sloshing it on your shirt. That's why we start with white wine. Number 3, sniff. Don't be shy, get your beak right in there. And now most people say, hey, it just smells like wine to me. It is subjective, but you can improve over time. One of my online course students described an oaky Chardonnay as smelling like her son's gerbil cage. Can you guess why? It was the wood chips in the cage. There are no wrong answers because it's based on your own experience. I get lime and grapefruit from this Sauvignon Blanc. Fun fact, our sense of smell is actually 10,000 times more sensitive than our sense of taste, which is why sommeliers spend so much time nosing their wines before they even take a sip. Step number 4, sip. Let the wine coat your tongue and roll around to taste its flavors and feel its weight. Can you feel that acidity coming down both sides of your mouth like 2 little gushers? This wine is literally whetting your appetite for food. And step 5, savor. This is where, after you swallow, you breathe out through your nose and notice how long you're still smelling the aromas. This wine has a lovely crisp finish that leaves me longing for more of it. And although the finish isn't long, this wine is definitely well made. And what would we pair with it? Well, we keep the appetizers simple for 2 reasons. This is meant to be fun and easy, and simpler food flavors like these lemon goat cheese crackers and a tiny bit of lemon zest on top won't overwhelm your wine. I suggest you take a sip of your wine first, then a bite of the cracker, then go back to the wine and see how your perception of it has changed. The wine's herbal notes high-five the herbs in the cheese while the acidity cuts right through that creaminess. In turn, the wine's acidity seems to have softened from the fat in the cheese. All right, let's do this at speed with our other 2 wines. This gorgeous rosé is called Oh Goody from a boutique Niagara winery, Palatine Hills, known for their premium small batch wines. Go Canada. Step 1, look. It's a beautiful salmon pink, the color of optimism. Step 2 and 3, swirl and sniff. Strawberry fields forever. Pro tip, hold your wine by the stem, not by the bowl. This prevents your hand from warming the wine and keeps fingerprints off the glass, though no need to have your pinky in the air. That's not necessary. Step 4, definitely more fresh berries as we taste it. And 5, rosé is meant to be an in-the-moment kind of wine, so while the finish isn't extremely long, this wine is definitely well made. To pair, you can keep the pink theme going with these lovely smoked salmon bellinis. Top tiny buckwheat pancakes with silky cold smoked salmon, a dollop of cool tangy creme fraiche, and a whisper of fresh dill. The wine's racy acidity cuts through the richness of the salmon while its strawberry notes echo the brightness of the creme fraiche. And for our finale, we're finishing big and bold with the Casillero del Diablo from Chile. Take a look at those deep red and blackberry hues in the glass. Step 2 and 3, this wine almost jumps out of the glass to meet your nose with aromas of fleshy ripe plum, blackberries, and mocha. Step 4, those velvety rich berry flavors really come through. Step 5, this finish is long and satisfying. For appetizers, try simple slices of salami or chorizo. The fat and the spice of the meat handle the bold sweetness of the wine perfectly. It's a match that feels like a party in your mouth or, dare I say, a carnival for your taste buds. Final words of wisdom, keep it relaxed. You don't need a tweed jacket to taste wine. You have a mouth and you have an opinion, so you're already an expert on your own taste. By the end of the evening, no one really remembers the tasting notes. They do remember, though, who they were sitting beside, who made them laugh until they snorted, and that is the real finish that matters. On upcoming TV shows for CTV's Your Morning, as well as City TV's Breakfast Television and Global's Morning Show, will be chatting about fresh spring wines and environmentally sustainable drinks for Earth Hour and Earth Day, Easter, Mother's Day, Father's Day, the FIFA Games, and Canada Day. I'm sharing more tips and sips on Instagram at Natalie McLean Wine, so join me there for more of the weird and wonderful. Okay, on with the show and our conversation with Sarah Heller. Sarah Heller, Master of Wine, is an internationally acclaimed wine expert and visual artist whose work explores the cultural history and multi-sensory experience of wine. Trained in fine art at Yale University, she creates paintings, drawings, and digital pieces, including her visual tasting notes, a series which have appeared in exhibitions and publications across several continents. She is the Italian wine reviewer for Club Enologique, faculty of the Vinitelli International Academy, and wine editor for Asia Tatler. Sarah also co-hosted the series Wine Masters and Wine Masters Class and has collaborated with Lucaris Crystal on a line of hand-blown glasses. Previously, she worked in the wine trade in New York and Hong Kong, where she was executive director of Meeberg Wine Media, and she recently relocated to the Pacific Northwest. She joins us now from her home in Mercer Island, Washington. Welcome, Sarah. It's so great to have you here with us.
Thanks, Natalie. Very happy to be here also. I was just as you said, what's the weather like? It's like today had to be the most Seattle day. It actually is raining quite heavily, so I apologize if you can hear that in the background.
Well, it's on trend, or it's demonstrating great typicity, as we would say in the wine world. So I guess.
Exactly, true to terroir.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So I alluded to this in the intro, but we often hear about people stumbling into the wine industry, like my own entry. But your entry was quite literally a fall. Can you take us back to the winery in southern France where you actually fell into a wine vat, which just sounds really scary?
Yeah, it was not great. I had been working or I'd been intern, I should say, at the wine importer in New York, and they indulged my desire to go visit a number of the wineries over the summer and try my hand at winemaking or helping out in some way. And I think to try and give me something winemaking like to do, because I'd mainly been in the tasting room, they had me hosing off barrels after doing the topping up, huage. I came across a patch of spiders in the corner. It was a stupid vindictive thing. They had been crawling all over me the whole time as I'd been doing the topping up. And I was like, I'm going to get you. So I aimed my hose at them, forgetting that I'd been told, do not ever step backwards in a winery. So I stepped into a manhole
Oh,
that led into one of the concrete vats. It was empty. I had not been drinking, maybe inhaling fumes, who knows. I fell into this vat, but actually, part of the reason why I do think it is so lucky, this was the only vat in this whole winery that had had the front removed from it and was being used as a barrel storage space. And I managed to fall right between the barrels. So the winery, which I will not name for health and safety reasons, to be clear, they've done a lot of health and safety improvements since then. They told somebody later that if I had fallen a foot one way in either direction, I would have been killed.
wow.
I fell, I fractured my spine. It's totally fine now, but obviously very dramatic. Poor winemaker running up and down the halls going, so he was running up and down, managed to find me. Luckily, as I say, because it was open, they were able to get me out, ambulanced me over to the hospital in Avignon. So that is unfortunately the only time I've ever spent in Avignon, was in the hospital recovering from this. Yeah, then it was a week there. My parents immediately flew in. I had to call them. They were in Hong Kong. It's the middle of the night. Called them, and they're like, later they would say, "My dad, this was the second worst phone call you could ever get in your life," because obviously the first worst is from somebody else telling you what's happened to your child. But oh, my poor parents.
Yeah, I'll bet.
So I mean, they immediately made their way over to where I was. Fortunately, relatively soon, it became clear that I didn't have any nerve damage, could move all the fingers and toes. Luckily, I was an equestrian as a kid, so I kind of knew, you don't immediately sit up, right, when you potentially have a fracture. You just lie there
Oh, I
and
see.
try and check
Good to know.
yep, very, very good to know if you ever fall into a wine
Tip
vat.
number one on this wine show, yes. Oh my gosh, but Sarah, like lesser interns would have said, "That's it." What about this said, "Oh yeah, I'm all in. Let's go for it in the wine industry."
Well, I did say no on any future winemaking attempts, so there's that. But something really appealed to me about the wine industry, and I think really played itself out in that scenario, was just everybody's very generous, everybody's very kind. People are not trying. Certainly in the environment that I was in, and I can't speak to the whole wine industry, but that in that particular moment, I felt like I think they were a bit concerned, to be honest, because my parents are lawyers and we're all American, but everybody was there trying to make things as pleasant as possible. Everybody wanted to be helpful. And I mean, it was my mistake. I shouldn't have stepped backwards. I shouldn't have tried to take out these spiders. So I didn't feel like it was an indictment of wine.
No, well, good for you. I mean, you've been through a number of challenges in your life and managed to turn them around into something positive. This is just a really great story and example. All right. So before the accident, you had a chef bug. You wanted to cook. And so while interning at an Italian restaurant, During a semester off from school, the chef became too sick to travel to Vinitaly, which is the largest wine trade show in the world. It is really amazing. And for those of you who have not attended, even if you're consumers, let alone trade in the business, you really should attend. So he sent you, a 20-year-old intern, to be his representative. What was that like?
Well, luckily it didn't really involve anything much. It was that he, I think, liked to go to Vinitaly to visit suppliers who provided wine for his restaurant. But this was not a massive restaurant or a Michelin-starred restaurant. So it was kind of his socializing, which I handily took on. So he set me up with, there was a wine producer who was sort of their closest ally, I would say, who took me under their wing and shepherded me around. But I will say one thing that was not made entirely clear to me, and probably should have been before I went, is that you're really meant to spit when you try wines.
You were not spitting at this point?
No, there was a little bit of a macho culture around it. Like, oh no, real people don't spit. And it's like, oh, I don't know, that doesn't seem very smart. But there I was. And so by the end of the day, I mean, the people who had been assigned to take me under their wing,
They were carrying you?
decanting me into a taxi.
Decanting you into a taxi.
I made it. I made it safely home, thank goodness.
That must have been overwhelming, though. Vinitaly is so huge. What do they compare to? How many football field size? This is a huge trade show, isn't it?
It is. It's funny. I should have these stats off the top of my head, given how long I've worked with them. But yes. The fact that each region had its own pavilion, I just thought was so glorious. I've been reading, it was David Lynch and Joe Bastianich, I think, who did Vino Italiano, that book, and I'd been working my way through it. And just this idea, I mean, I think I'd been vaguely aware, but the idea that each region had its own culture is just so fascinating. So the idea that I could then go and immerse myself in each one in this trade fair was just a dream.
Amazing. You also have a story about your early days in Hong Kong, where you were enthusing about natural wine to an older Scottish gentleman at a wine society dinner. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So relatively quickly after arriving back in Hong Kong, I threw sort of some friends of my parents, actually a particular friend of my parents, named Charlie Smith, who has a winery in Sonoma. So just wanted to call him out. He introduced me to the Hong Kong Wine Society. It was, at the time especially, I'd say mainly older people, not necessarily all old men. In fact, a healthy contingent of older women who all kind of became my wine aunties and uncles, including this man. So we were sitting together at dinner. This was one of my early wine society dinners, chatting away. And I'd been working for this importer in New York, as I say, who were very focused on what I'd call kind of proto-natural wine at that point. Like there were some natural wine producers, but it was more people who were fascinated by biodynamics. So Nicolas Joly, I had to read his book for this piece of marketing materials that I was in charge of putting together. So it's very, I don't know that I was 100% bought into it, because I still sort of had a bit of a scientific mind critical thinking around it, but it was fascinating to me. So I was talking about this probably at him more than with him, and he was nodding politely along. And then by the end of the evening, he turns to me, I don't know if I'm going to risk trying the accent. And it's just, it's been lovely to meet you, but you might want to consider getting some formal wine education instead of just spewing all this marketing BS. So, yeah, like, oh, it was great to meet you too. But I mean, at the time, I was a little taken aback, not going to lie, but he's Scottish. They're blunt.
Yes, we are.
Sorry, I'm actually a tiny bit Scottish, so maybe that's where it comes from.
Well, there you go. So did he become your teacher, your wine teacher?
He did. He was my level 3 WSET instructor, and he's a fantastic instructor. And I think precisely because of that bluntness, this eagerness to seek out the facts and follow them to their logical conclusions, even when they're not particularly romantic, which they often are not with wine, unfortunately.
It's important, an important learning point when it comes to, because there's a lot of wine received wisdom out there, and we'll get to that. So you also work closely with legendary Deborah Meeberg. Am I pronouncing her last name correctly, by the way?
It's Meiberg.
Meiberg, thank you.
It's Meiberg.
Meiberg. Master of Wine, eventually becoming executive director of the Meiberg Wine Media at just 23. You've done so much so young. Despite your title, people constantly referred to you as Deborah's assistant. Can you share a story of how she went out of her way to support you, to credit you, to mentor you?
Yeah, so Deborah's amazing. And I will honestly say when I first started working with her, and it happened a couple of times, I think, as I was young, a young girl working for a very established sort of wine industry star, and people just assumed I was her assistant. I think that means different things in different cultures also. I don't know that I necessarily took offense because prior to being interested in food and wine, I'd actually been more interested in fashion, and I had a number of friends who were working in that industry. And I mean, the assumption is absolutely if you were a younger person working for a very senior person, you would be their assistant. There wasn't really, it didn't seem like a shameful thing at all. But she was incredible. She was like, no, that's not what you're doing. You're setting the agenda. You're working on the research that we're doing. You're not booking my manicures. It was really her kind of direction to empower me and feel like, no, I could take ownership of some of the work that we were doing, which I'm really proud of to this day. And then in terms of writing, I mean, she had a column for many years with the South China Morning Post, which is the main English and language newspaper in Hong Kong. And she can't remember exactly the sequence of events, but at a certain point, she's like, I'm a bit wrung out. And I think this anybody who writes for a living can relate to this, right? You get to a point where it's just, what is my new column going to be about? Whereas I was 23, I think 22, 23, and was just like, oh, I have all these ideas. I want to write things. And I think in many scenarios, people would have said, cool, you write the column. We'll continue to have my masthead on it. It'll be fine. But she wrote the paper and said, I want both of us to be credited as authors on this.
Terrific. Wow. That's a big
Again,
step.
incredible.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, and I ended up getting later my own column with the South China Morning Post, which I think wouldn't have happened had she not taken that step.
Yeah, that's powerful. Someone letting you in. Yeah, absolutely. Looking back at that period in Hong Kong around 2010, it was as you described it, a gold rush era for wine. What was the most absurd or maybe extravagant wine event that you've ever witnessed during those boom years? It doesn't have to be in Hong Kong, but anywhere. What have you seen?
It's funny. I feel like it's not. What industry can I compare it to without causing offense? It's not really like the spirits industry, for instance, where I think that, a lot of celebrities and a lot of show goes into it necessarily. I think it's more about just the craziness of the bottles that people are bringing to things. And something about Hong Kong that I think distinguishes it, certainly from the UK collector scene, which was sort of, I guess, my reference point to a certain degree, is that people open their bottles, right? These are not, I mean, some people have generational collections, but most people, this was a collection they started, they can remember starting it, and they want to share it with people. And I think there's this idea that it's all about showing off, and obviously showing off is part of it. There's no denying that. But there's also an incredible spirit of generosity, right, in wanting to share these incredible treasures that you have in your cellar with everybody around you, with the people that you care about. I mean, I think if I contemplate some of the events that I've been to, probably the more ridiculous, flamboyant ones are Burgundy events, right? Just because of how expensive Burgundy has become. But I'll tell you, the people who were collecting Burgundy when I first started in wine in Hong Kong was not a big group. It was people who really, really loved the wine. Remember, the sort of the dominant mindset at that point was Bordeaux, toujours Bordeaux, right? So to be a Burgundy person, people would be like, "Wow, that stuff, there's nothing to it. It's watery. It's elegant, as in it doesn't smell like anything," right? So I think the Burgundy thing started to happen through maybe 2015, 2016, 2017, really ramped up. But yeah, and that was when you would go to kind of Pollet-like events where people would just bring these incredible, half the room was DRC.
That's the big event, New York City and DRC, Domaine Romani Conti.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, exactly. And you would just think about the thousands and thousands of dollars that were just in the spit cups, right, or in the dump buckets.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And that, yeah, it's a funny one. The intersection of wine and money is
It is.
uncomfortable in a
And then
certain
generosity, and they all blend together. It reminds me on a
Yeah.
lesser scale of the International Pinot Noir Festival in Oregon. You've probably been to that one, and there's a night where everybody swaps bottles at tables. It's very informal, but The
Right.
generosity of spirit there, it really was like, here's my whatever. And it could be the winemaker, it could be somebody else with a different bottle. And they just moved
Yeah.
around from table to table. It was wonderful. It was just amazing. And there'd be
That is
lots of
the thing. I
stories.
think fundamentally, right, wine bottles are that size because they're meant to be shared, right? They're
Yes.
not they're not single serve
Yeah,
packaging. Yeah.
exactly. Exactly. Now, you originally studied fine art at Yale University before entering the wine trade. What were your primary, if I'm asking this correctly, media? Like, did you work in oils or mixed art materials, or what did you
Yeah.
specialize
So
in?
you had to choose a concentration. So I was a
Okay.
painting major.
Okay.
I mainly painted in acrylics. I joke that I couldn't be trusted with oils. I just they're very slow drying, and a lot of the solvents are very toxic, and I
Oh,
just don't trust myself to
okay.
manage that in a responsible way. And so acrylics. But actually, the thing about the program, the Yale art major is quite small, and you also interact a lot with the MFA program. So I was lucky enough. The Yale MFA program in art is one of the top, I don't know, 3, 5 in the country.
Yes.
And so I was able to take a lot of classes with those professors and also have grad students in class with me, which was just incredible.
Hmm.
And the final year, you really had to zero in on what you were going to do. And I'd been through this kind of journey with painting, maybe not dissimilar to what later happened with me and wine, where I started to feel bounded by the kind of the technical requirements of it, or just there's something about the problems that painting was posing that didn't sit right with me. And I felt
Okay.
like I needed to go outside. And so I ended up doing a series of classes that were totally outside of my comfort zone. So I did a sculpture class, but this was a period when sculpture at Yale, I don't know if it's still this way, but there's nobody there like chiseling marble or making bronze casts or anything. It's like sculpture is the most amorphous specialty or medium is not really the correct way of putting it, but so people were doing performance with objects. People were, it was very fluid, and I loved it. And so that ended up being what I did my senior year. My project was is there a less controversial way to put it? It was about the idea of trophy wives,
Ah,
um,
okay.
and using somebody else's body as an expression of your prestige or as an assertion
Wow.
of yourself.
That is
And
fascinating.
it was just being sort of adjacent to New York. It was something that I saw a lot of, and I found fascinating that world. And I was spending time in environments where that was not uncommon, and so the output of that ended up being this series of masks and devices. They were very low tech, kind of by design, but the idea there were a number of ideas at work, but one of them was about kind of the remove at which we keep ourselves from each
Mhm.
other and like the discomfort around expressing emotions
Hmm.
and expressing desire and so there were a lot of kind of complicated masks. One of them was people who basically lost the ability to emote. So there was a plastic like astronaut helmet,
Okay.
and it was just like to allow you to preserve your sort of perfect face. But then there were these things that were like almost like contact lenses
Ah.
that you could attach to the front that had eyebrows and kind of wrinkles etched in, so that you could still emote and express. So
Wow, what
it
an
was
imagination you have. My goodness.
it was fun, and that probably would have been the line I'd continued to pursue had I not fallen into a
Follow.
vat. My intention had always been to continue with wine, but also have my art career in parallel,
The art
which
career.
was just a little bit more challenging in Hong Kong. It wasn't the art I was making and the art that was selling in Hong Kong were just a complete misalignment. So
Sure. But you still
another life that
managed,
could have been.
yeah, you still managed to combine wine and art. You've said that standard wine descriptors often fail to capture the magic of the experience. Why do you believe that visual art can bridge that gap better than words like blackberry or tobacco or whatever?
Yeah, and obviously I don't want to dump on the idea of writing wine notes. I mean, the whole
Of course.
industry is sort of built on this,
Sure.
and we all do it. But it was more honestly a reaction after having finished The Master of Wine, which
Mm.
is very, very much a bounded problem, right? You have to accept that this is the way that things are done,
Hmm.
and if you try to expand beyond that, the only person who's going to suffer from that is you, right? Like it's very directed and clear, which I think is useful, right? If you're trying to create a standardized certification. But having got out on the other side of that and broken my writing style down so that it was very as objective as possible and as kind of simple and direct as possible. Say I felt broken, but I was just a bit done with it. Right? It's like, I don't want to talk about red versus black fruit. Berry. It had become sort of sterile
Right.
at
Hmm.
that point
Bit
for me.
reductionist.
And
Yeah. Hmm.
yeah, and it's not that I don't think people should study that, but it was just the phase that I was in.
Sure.
And I wanted to figure out what my voice was going to be. And honestly, I wish it was something more sophisticated than this, but I wanted to have a presence on Instagram that was not bottle shots because I love wine and I'm not that interested in looking at other people's bottle shots. It's like, well, if people aren't interested in wine at all, they're not going to want to see my bottle shots. And I didn't want to make it mainly me on
Hmm.
camera. I
Hmm.
just that's no judgment against anybody whose work that is, but it just wasn't what I wanted to do.
Sure.
And so I was like, well, I'm sure I can come up with, obviously I'd seen Wine Follies infographics, which are awesome, and various other sort of more clear and objective, sort of demystifying wine type graphics. And I've always been a bit skeptical about this idea of demystifying wine. I think wine's mystique, right, is what's that to me is the magic, right? That
Yes, the magic. How can we, yeah,
yeah,
make it understood without dispelling the magic? That's the
exactly.
challenge,
How
isn't it?
can we still keep it? It's a little, yeah, it's the Esther Perel thing, right? You want a bit of distance between between yourself and the thing you love. Otherwise, there's no leap to make. So
Huh.
it's like, well, if I could make images, I'm a person who makes images, right? If I could make images that were in some ways clarifying, but in other ways more intriguing, like drove people to want to learn more,
Hmm.
could that be something that would be interesting, right? And so they were very, very simple. I initially thought they would be handmade. And I was doing these. I really, if anybody scrolls back to the very, very beginning of my Instagram, I think some of them I've actually deleted because they're embarrassing. But um, they were like paper cutouts and really rough, like almost done with a Sharpie. And it was just like the thing that stayed the same for a very long time was the overall shape
Okay.
and the overall color mood,
Hmm.
which I think is still a useful tool for thinking about wines, is that sort of those two basic things. And then beyond that, you can kind of narrow in on more specific flavors, textures, aromas.
Hmm.
But sort of nailing those, I think, will get you closer to an identity for wine if you're blind tasting to identify wine
Okay.
than individual descriptors.
Huh. And we're going to
Um,
talk more about shape. Yeah. But what would be an example of, like you in your visual tasting note for Domaine Clos de la Chapelle, you described a large oily body with delicate lacy skin of acidity. How do you physically render lacy skin of acidity when you're using, say, digital techniques? Like what do the latest images or visual tasting notes look like now?
Yeah, so I think the thing that's really important for me when I'm putting together a note is not to be too literal.
Okay.
I've done that before where I've taken a picture of an oil blob. To recreate that, it could be like a picture of an oil blob and then like a certain Photoshop filter with lace on top. And that's why I think words maybe don't get at quite what I'm trying to say, right? Because if you could just say it with words, what's the point of making the image? So it's
Sure.
about finding a shape that communicates the same sensation as the word oily, but also like the actual way that it feels, right? It's that sort of
Mm.
amorphousness, right? And
Mm.
and a sort of enveloping quality. So it is complicated. It's often I'll find images and they're I use about 50% open source or whatever they're called, Creative Commons images, and actually these days probably more my own images. They're often things. Mercer Island has been great because I go hiking and I find just the weirdest things. Like there's this really bizarre slime fungus
Oh,
that was growing on a log at
okay.
one point, but visually it was glossy and it had that, so it became like an oily thing.
Right.
Um, so decontextualized, right? It was actually quite beautiful. And so it is often things like that, not the literal thing, but something that in a flash reminds me of the wine. And so then a lacy thing would often be not actual lace, but maybe the leaves of my lace leaf maples, right? So there's sort of like layers of remove. But I think the idea is that it functions a little bit the way that my understanding of how cognition works, right? Is that like we have these images and we can kind of assemble them, but they're not necessarily directly tied. I think the challenge that I have with words is that they give a sense that there's certainty and
Mm.
um,
Precision.
objectivity and
Yeah. Yeah.
precision.
Like
Exactly.
math.
And I
Yeah.
just,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, almost like math. And I just don't think the way that we sense things really functions that way.
Mm. I agree.
Reading my or listening to some of the work of my now fellow MW Janice Wang. She's this incredible sensory researcher. She worked, I think now she's in Denmark, but she worked at with Professor Charles Spence,
Oh yes, with the music
whose
and
research was super, super, yeah,
is he at
exactly.
Cambridge or Oxford? One of those places.
I was trying to remember. I think it's
Yeah.
Oxford. I think it's
Yeah.
Oxford.
Yeah,
Oh,
he's done some
sorry
really
if I got it wrong.
amazing work on the impact
Yeah.
of sound music on wine. Yeah.
hmm
Uh-huh.
And her research that I remember saw like a webinar or something that she was doing was about tactility, right? So they were doing an experiment where they
Hmm.
put different textures, wrapping them around the stem of a wine glass, and just that
Oh,
sensory priming that you get basically led
okay.
people to experience the wines differently.
So velvety, if you had a smooth whatever, you're going to find that texture in the wine
hmm
because you've been primed.
hmm
Yeah. Okay. Wow.
That was
That's
the
interesting.
idea, which I just found fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so much cross modal work being
hmm
done now. You teach about the concept of the shape of wine, which I just love because a lot of folks don't get into this. You often draw an outline to represent structure. Can you walk us through, say, the visual shape of a jagged, tannic young Barolo of robust northern Italian wine versus a round, say, plush Australian Shiraz?
Sure. So I think the thing I try to remind people when I'm teaching this, and it's not provisional, but it's a concept that I'm still always trying to work out. I didn't develop this as a pedagogical tool. It was originally supposed to be art, and so I think it's more about kind of getting an embodied sense of what the wine is like rather than a one-to-one kind of graph of what happens. Loosely, the way I'd been thinking about it was that the top part of the shape would represent sort of the nose and the entry into the palate. The middle is the mid palate, the bottom is the back. So you read it from top to bottom.
Okay.
Um, and so I think with a plush Shiraz, right, really isn't any angularity or any sort of rigidity or hard lines until you get to the very back with Australian Shiraz, because I don't want to say all of them, but many of them are acidified, right, in order to maintain balance. And so you have that really sharp spike on the back. And it's to me a classic example of a wine with lots of tension, right? It's that real softness, lusciousness offset by the sharpness. Whereas other wines, mm, not historically Barolo, but I'd say a lot more Barolo these days, are the balance is more harmonious, right? There's more of an attempt at keeping everything in sort of a medium level, which to me is a little bit of a traditionalist, or it's a debate I don't necessarily want to wade into entirely, but I really admire the way that contemporary Barolo's style has made itself more generally appealing, but I really hope that it doesn't lose its angles altogether, right? Because so Barolo, right, is like this beautiful sort of blossoming nose.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say potentially even more so Barbaresco, which tends to have the openness earlier on. But then on the palate, there's kind of a leanness that emerges almost immediately, right? It's not a thick wine ever. So the middle is sort of maybe more. I think I would indicate this by having thinner lines, right? There's not as much hardness. And then on the back is when you really get this like, right? The clamping down, where the sort of the prettiness of the aromatic sensations tends to hand off instead to the structural elements that really then get you on the back.
And
Which
the
again is
getting
sort of
you
a
on the
wine of
back, is that
tension.
the bitterness or the tannins? What's happening back there?
The bitterness, the tannins, and the acidity. It's sort of
And the
that synergy
acidity.
of three hard
Right.
elements that I
Right.
think really the acidity I think needs to be present on the front as well, or that
Mm-hmm.
cloud of aromas gets really overwhelming and
Mm-hmm.
sort of cloying, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, the other thing that I wanted with people thinking about shape is to think about wines temporally, right? I mean, I think people do generally, but more explicitly thinking about how textures, aromas, everything evolves even on the palate from the first impression to the last.
And in the glass, and yeah, absolutely. Wine is all about time, and it's a great way to look at it. Well, there you have it. I hope you enjoyed our chat with Sarah. Here are my takeaways. Why is spitting essential if you want to taste wine seriously? I love Sarah's story about the wine producer who took her under their wing and shepherded her around a wine tasting. But one thing was not made entirely clear to her, that you should be spitting when you dry wines. There can be a bit of a macho culture around that real pros don't spit. But by the end of that day, the people who had been assigned to escort her were decanting her into a taxi. I love that phrase. She made it safely home and remembered the lesson. Number 2, what made Hong Kong's wine boom in 2010 feel extravagant and generous? As Sarah explains, it's interesting. It's not like the spirits industry, where she says there are more celebrities and a lot of showmanship. In wine, it's more about the craziness of bottles that people bring to events to share with others. Some people, she said, have generational collections, or perhaps it was the collection they started. They just want to share these special bottles with others rather than showing them off. There's an incredible spirit of generosity in wanting to share these treasures that you have in your cellar with those who really will appreciate them. And as she thinks about some of the events she's been to, probably the most flamboyant ones are Burgundian events, just because of how expensive Burgundy has become. And number 3, does formal wine tasting language strip the emotion out of wine writing? Obviously, as Sarah says, neither she nor I are dumping on the idea of writing wine notes. We both do it, as do anybody else who's trying to describe wine. But for her, it was a reaction after having finished the Master of Wine program, which is very structured and has bounded problems. You have to accept that this is the way things are done, the way wine is described. But now being on the other side of that process and having analyzed her writing style so that it was objective as possible, as simple and as direct as possible, she's a bit done with it. I totally empathize about not wanting to talk about red versus black fruit. It can become sterile. Her journey now is to figure out what her voice is and will become. If you missed episode 73, go back and take a listen. I chat about women versus men when it comes to wine tasting with Dr. Gary Pickering. I'll share a short clip with you now to whet your appetite.
You are more likely to be a super taster if you're a woman. It may be as high as twice as likely. Women have other advantages too. They tend to be better discriminators, be able to use words and vocab better to describe what they're sensing in wine. We're basically a lost cause, us men, Natalie.
Well, that's what I was getting at, and I'm so glad you've joined us to help prove the point. This is really grossly generalizing, but if we think of men being more right-brained, spatially, math, and women being more left-brained, logic, putting words to aromas, what you said really picks up on those generalizations. What do you mean by women tend to be more discriminating?
The work suggests that when you have an odorant, an aroma compound at a particular concentration in wine, you don't need to add as much before women will pick the two samples as being different, whereas you need a high concentration of that odor for men to be able to discriminate between those two smells. Women can put more accurate and consistent labels on what they smell.
You won't want to miss next week when we continue our chat with Sarah. To give you a taste of future guests, we'll have Michael Finnerty on pairing wine and cheese, Dr. Charles Knowles, who has just published the best-selling memoir Why We Drink Too Much, Marisol de la Fuente on the wines of Argentina, Alan Ramey, author of the new book Pressing Matters about starting a career journey in the wine world, and Nicole and Ramon Bassett on Tasting Victory, the life and wines of the world's favorite sommelier, Gerard Bassett. Do you have a question for any of our guests? Please let me know. Do you know someone who'd be interested in learning more about tasting wine? Please let them know about this podcast. Email or text them now while you're thinking about it. It's easy to find the Unreserved Wine Talk podcast. Just tell them to search for that title or my name, Natalie McLean Wine, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, their favorite podcast app, or they can listen to the show on my website at nataliemclean.com/podcast. Thank you for taking the time to join me here. I hope something great is in your glass this week, perhaps a wine that speaks to you beyond its tasting notes.
You don't want to miss one juicy episode of this podcast, especially the secret, full-bodied bonus episodes that I don't announce on social media. So, subscribe for free now at nataliemclean.com/subscribe. Meet me here next week. Cheers.